welcome to another episode of the Premier League Proven Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff, with my brother and co-host, Kevin. And today we're here to talk about a topic near and dear to my heart because I am a Manchester United fan, have been since, around 2007, 2006 or so. And this is about why you should support Manchester United. If you're an American fan, this is probably the club that is most quote-unquote famous, especially if you're not, still in high school or something like that, then you probably have no idea who Manchester United is. But Manchester United has kind of been the equivalent of the Cowboys or the Lakers or the Yankees in American sports for quite some time. And it's a team that has a lot of media speculation about them. So let's learn a little bit about what it means to support the club and what the club has been about. So what I will say is that Manchester United, definitely one of the, even before they were extremely successful, were one of the most famous clubs in England. They have Old Trafford, which is perhaps, other than Anfield, the most famous stadium for a club in all of England. It's huge. It holds like 76,000 people. And when the club was even back in the day, it was always one of the best supported teams across the country. They had a lot of successful periods. The most notable was actually in the 1950s, right after the Second World War. You can actually see there's a great picture, well, not great, but interesting picture of Old Trafford bombed out by the Germans from the Blitz. And you can see just how, it really takes you to the next level of how much this really impacted everything, as if we didn't know that. But to see the stadium that they're playing in today bombed out is, a very powerful sight. But Manchester United in the 1950s, really famous, called the Busby Babes, led by Sir Matt Busby. They dominated. They ended up winning a European Cup. In 1958, one of the most famous disasters in soccer history happened, which is the Munich air disaster, which is where the entire first team, or a significant portion of the first team, died in an airplane accident in Munich, including a ton of, a team that was destined for the top, that was supposed to be one of the best teams in Europe. A lot of players died there, and the biggest tragedies that the sport has seen. One guy, Duncan Edwards, was, if you talk to any Manchester United fan that's now like 100 or, 105, they would all tell you that Duncan Edwards was this 21-year-old who was literally destined to be the greatest player United had ever seen. And unfortunately, he was taken in the plane crash. But somehow, and Real Madrid back then, it obviously swept the world of soccer in terms of the disaster. But Real Madrid offered Alfredo. I don't know. Alfredo makes me think that I'm just thinking like fettuccine Alfredo. But Di Stefano, who was the best player in the world at that time, they had offered him as a free to kind of play because they needed players to sign up for the team. And one of the kind of biggest things that made Real Madrid and Manchester United kind of have this long-term bond. But anyway, Manchester United kind of did well. They went through a bad period where one of their legends actually ended up helping to get them relegated, Dennis Law, who has part of the statue outside of Trafford, along with Bobby Charlton and George Best. And they're kind of known as the Holy Trinity. And Dennis Law went across town for Manchester City and kind of scored this, I think, backheel goal that ended up getting Manchester United relegated. But they were able to bounce that back up pretty quickly. And the most fateful thing that they did in the last, 50 years or even 100 years is appoint Sir Alex Ferguson. Sir Alex Ferguson is, the Phil Jackson or the Bill Belichick, just this kind of institution in the game. And they appointed him in 1986. He's a Scottish guy who was a decent player himself, actually went for quite a bit of money, I think a world record or a Scottish record at the time as a striker to go to Rangers. But he took this club to heights that no other team had really ever seen in England before. It all coincided. I went through a lot of this with the history of the Premier League episode, so you should definitely go check that out to get a little bit more in depth of kind of how Manchester United took the Premier League by storm. But when the Premier League was instituted, United was well placed because of Sir Alex Ferguson to basically grow. And so by the 90s and mid 2000s, United was the dominant team in England. So basically, the last 30 years, if you've grown up watching soccer, most people grew up watching Manchester United on top, all leading to the last 10 years when Sir Alex Ferguson retired in 2013. That has led to a new era, a not so good era for Manchester United Football Club. And so Manchester United won Premier League after Premier League, won, probably 70% of the Premier League titles for like a 20-year period. And since Sir Alex Ferguson, they have won zero. They have won none. And Sir Alex Ferguson, when he joined the club, he said he was going to knock Liverpool off their fucking perch because they had the most titles in English history. They had 18, and I think United had like 7 when Fergie arrived. And when Fergie left, United was up to 20, and Liverpool was still at 18. Liverpool has won 1 since then, so Manchester United has 20 titles in their history, which is the most of any team in England. Liverpool is in second with 19, and both clubs are desperate for the other one because they are each other's biggest rivals to not win, either close the gap or re-separate them by a little bit. So Manchester United has been in this weird period since Fergie left. Fergie ended up kind of appointed his own successor, which honestly never really a good idea. But when a guy's there and is that successful, I mean, they named like a stand after him and they're going to put a statue up. And so, I mean, this guy is the club in some way for a long time. So it's hard not to do what he wants.
Yeah, when you get so big, you just like can't tell people no. You know what I mean? They're just the face of your club, and even if you don't know if it's going to work out, it's just really, really hard to say you're not going to get your wishes, especially at the end.
Yeah, totally. And he ended up picking another Scotsman, David Moyes, who's now the coach of West Ham. And he was just not a good fit for the club. He kind of does not have the arrogance or that kind of thing that is associated with it, and ended up being a disaster. Then they appointed Louis van Gaal, who didn't understand the style of play for the club. He was much more Barcelona type guy, which is not what Manchester United classically is. And then the kind of corpse of Jose Mourinho, they were a little bit successful, but that guy is the most toxic guy in the entire world.
No, thank you. Do not hire.
Yeah, we've both seen the bad parts of that. And then Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who's just like this.
At least you saw the good parts. I just saw the bad parts.
Yeah, he didn't really have any good parts at Tottenham, but he did have the documentary though. No. So I mean, you got to see him behind the scenes.
Yeah, well, that's just it internalizes the bad parts.
I can't believe they watched him coach United and then decided that they wanted a part of that. Like, that was so utterly predictable. But anyway, the Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, this famous guy who was a striker for United and won them the European Championship and the treble back in 1999, coached them for a while. And, he brought the good vibes back and actually had a pretty successful run where they finished second and finished in the Champions League a couple times in the top 2 or 3 a few times, twice I think, but that didn't end up great because he just isn't on the level tactically as the other managers. And now, hopefully, with a new Don and Eric Ten Hag, who seems to be the first manager since Fergie left that really has connected with the fans in a way that seems hopeful and optimistic for the future. But this is Manchester United. Things don't go well recently. But anyway, so what does Manchester United kind of mean? What is the club all about? So Manchester United is probably the most talked about, most hated in some ways, most kind of drama-filled club in all of England. Something bad happens to Manchester United, some drama happens, every newspaper covers it, everyone talks shit about them. Basically everybody loves to see them lose, make fun of them. In that way, they very much are the Yankees, the Lakers, the Cowboys. And, but I'd say they're most like probably the Yankees or the Cowboys right now because they haven't won any. They're not really any good either. Manchester United has always been a team that has wanted attacking play. So an attacking ethos has always been something that they've wanted, which is why I think Louis van Gaal and Jose Mourinho did not really fit the club very well. So speed, wingers, attacking football with Cristiano Ronaldo, all the strikers that they've had going down through their history, especially kind of counterattacking, high speed, high skill, desire, Those are all things that Manchester United fans demand from their team. They're not as much of a possession-based team that like a Barcelona or recently an Arsenal or something would like, and not as defensive as historically as a team like Chelsea. And they also pride themselves on their youth players. So I think it's been since 1950. I'm pretty sure. I think it's around 1950 or so. Might even be longer than that. Manchester United has had a first team, an academy player named in the squad for a game. So
Wow.
literally, I don't think any other team is close to that. So the academy, although it's been somewhat surpassed recently by Chelsea and Manchester City, the academy is such an integral piece of the Manchester United kind of lore. They love supporting their own kind of guys. The academy classically is really strong, formed the backbone of the great 1990s Manchester United team. So, and this team is a team that now has become a commercial entity that is almost more about selling tractors and ramen packets and stuff like that more than it is anything else. So if you think of any team in the world that's probably more commercialized or that is the most commercialized, is the most kind of corporate, Manchester United is definitely at the top of that list. They basically, you know, economically are there to make a ton of money, and that all kind of comes in with the owners, who are probably the most hated people in that half of Manchester. Manchester City fans probably love them. The Glazers, who are an American family, I think there's news, and this may change. They were basically going to sell the club because everyone hates them in Manchester. There's a long green and gold campaign where everybody tried to boycott buying official merchandise. That didn't really work long term, but there's a lot of sit-ins, a lot of protests, people chanting that basically should what you call Glazers out, which is get the Glazers out of the club. Every Manchester United fan pretty much hates the Glazers, and they basically are so hated that it's tough for them to even go to their own games because they just get abuse hurled at them and other stuff probably hurled at them. There's all this stuff where they were going to sell the club, maybe to Qatar, maybe to this rich British guy, but it sounds like that's on hold because they weren't getting enough money. Their family kind of sounds like the family in Succession, where there's like six of them and they're all disagreeing, and is their dad that was super rich, but who knows? They're very hated. It kind of has put a dark cloud over the club. The part of the reason why they're hated is they don't invest any money into the club, into the stadium, all of which it needs. And they bought the club back in the early 2000s with a leveraged buyout. Honestly, should be illegal, but you basically just get a loan for all the money that you need to buy the club, and then pay back that loan with the earnings that you make on the club. So Manchester United, although they've always spent the most money of any team in the Premier League, maybe outside of periods of time where Chelsea and Manchester City spent above them, because they've always made the most amount of money, they've always spent less than they ought to or really should, or what they earn, because the Glazers are taking out huge cuts of interest and taking out the money that they paid for the club in the first place. So we'll see what that changes. The recent history of Manchester United is just not good because the teams that are dominant are their two biggest rivals. Liverpool has been probably the best team outside of Manchester City in the world for the last 5 years. They hate Manchester United, and Liverpool just hate each other, cannot stand each other. And Manchester City, who's their second biggest rival, cross-city rival, is now the best team in the world, and that does not look like it's going to change. So Manchester United is kind of, what does it say about you? I mean, it's a huge club. Everybody knows what it means to support the club. I think if you support the club, it's not like you're supporting a team that's no one's ever heard of. Everyone will be like, oh, well, if they don't know soccer, they'll be like, oh, wow, you support like Manchester United, and think you're a front runner, which you kind of would be because they do have the most amount of money and are one of the biggest clubs. But it's also a team that you don't even get the benefits of them ever winning. So this is the life of a Manchester United fan right now. I think it's a great club. It's a club that has a really rich history, has a really kind of vibrant culture, attacking culture to it, and is a team that is very much a giant that is fallen. Not even sleeping, because it's not like they're not trying to win. They spend huge amounts of money and always end up pretty much failing recently, but it's a team that has a ton of potential if they ever figure it out.
I think you see it too with United. You can just tell how big a team they are. Yeah, even if they're struggling a little bit, they have some of the biggest names that are always going, obviously like Cristiano Ronaldo, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, they're just getting players, even if they're not having good times, that are the best of the best in the world and world renowned. So it just shows like how renowned that club is, how many players. There's a few clubs in the world, probably only a handful that players are willing to go to no matter what state they're in, just because they're famous clubs. And I think United absolutely kind of falls in that category. And the nickname of like basically a lot of the stadiums over in the Prem have cool nicknames, but the Theater of Dreams, that's just the coolest nickname for Old Trafford. That is, I don't know, it's just something really cool to hear about. But at least me personally, just talking to and a lot of United fans and ones that I interact with, probably mostly in the States, I feel like they fall into two camps. One of the camps is kind of what you were talking about, where they are maybe not they're picking a team that's a big team, and they might not be the most informed or knowledgeable. And hey, that's okay because everybody has to start somewhere. But they just like say, hey, I like Manchester United, and it's like, oh, great, and you kind of like talk to them a little bit more. But it seems like they're really supporting some of the big names and big players that were there. But the other end of the spectrum, I think some of the most knowledgeable soccer fans that I talk to, obviously yourself included, but some other people I have kind of met in life, they are probably the most well-rounded with their overall soccer knowledge. And so maybe that says something about United, right? Saying that folks that know a lot about the game end up, picking with them or sticking with them. And maybe there's something different about, how exciting of a team they are. And yeah, it's good to watch. Another thing I love about them is just I feel like they're consistently signing great wingers. It's I think they're always looking for that next big guy. Like just watching written up. I don't know, growing up probably in the early 2000s, watching those YouTube compilations of Cristiano Ronaldo just taking on guys down the wing and making them.
Yeah, anybody that's watched Ronaldo recently, like he transitioned himself into like the best goal scorer in the world. But when he was young, he was just like like he did all the footwork. Like he was like he had all the tricks. He wasn't about the goals at all. Like he's like one of these guys that went diametrically the opposite way. Where at the beginning he wasn't all about goals, assists. He was just about showing guys up, messing around, doing tricks, doing flicks. Like he was just the most exciting player in the world to watch. And he's still a great. He got even better as a player, but lost a lot of all that flair really. But yeah, I think that entire era with Rooney, Tevez, the whole group is just really, they have with David Beckham, George Best, always had this, and now Marcus Rashford had really, really great wingers.
Yeah, that 7 jersey there is just so famous and so many players. And they're always in this pursuit of those kind of guys, right? You just name an infinite name of lists, right? Nani, sometimes it works out with, or sometimes it doesn't with like Sancho, Anthony, and recent memory. But they're always looking for these just guys that are just so fun to watch. And, at the end of the day, it is about winning stuff, but also it's about being entertained and watching fun players to watch. So I personally appreciate them as a neutral for United. I like watching, some of the guys that they always try to bring in, and there's kind of that personality or those values, and a lot of people call it DNA, but it's good DNA from the outside perspective.
Yeah, and United has always had this arrogance about them. There's a famous banner on that they have there that says, "Not arrogant, just better." Is a great, I think, kind of mantra because they always have been this team that has swagger. Eric Cantona, George Best, David, and if you look at the number 7 shirt, you do have George Best, you have Brian Robson, I think Brian Robson, who was their great captain in the 80s, David Beckham, Cristiano Ronaldo. So this is probably the most famous shirt in all of kind of the English game. Mason Mount now has it, which we'll see how that works out. But yeah, there's always been this kind of aggressive attacking swagger about United that they haven't really had quite as much just because they're not good anymore or really good at all anymore. But it is something that I think is part of the personality of the club, like you're saying.
Are we missing the best 7 to ever play for United with Alexis Sanchez?
Basically, all Manchester City, like there's always these rumors that are like, which Manchester City is like the best run club, and it's like, oh, Manchester City's interested in this player, and then United goes out and tries to like buy them. This happened with like Fred and Alexis Sanchez and Jadon Sancho, and literally every single one of those guys like just ends up not being good. But I'm sure if they ended up going to Manchester City, they'd probably still be the best players in the world.
So I think it's a pretty good recap of, where kind of United came from, the history, or just kind of the vibe of the club. But, and for me personally, I probably have come right after United's big era. So to me, they're a little bit less scary, right? They're not this, big bad team that I'm terrified to play, because you hear about it in most of the history of the Premier League. Is that was the team that teams just basically you chalk it up as a loss. Before you see it, you see.
They were Manchester City now. That the feeling that people have for Manchester City now is kind of what Manchester United was for 20 years.
Which reminds you how cyclical things are, right? Obviously the City era is incredible, and it probably will last for a decent amount of time, but there are ebbs and flows in clubs. So I think as I've gotten older, I always have to kind of remember that, because when you're young and we're watching, you're like, man, this era is never going to end, good or bad. But it does, and this too shall pass, for better or for worse. So I guess, with Ten Hag coming in, I mean, are you excited again for kind of how they're playing? Like, I guess, what do you think the feeling is with the club? Because like you talked about, it seems like he's kind of been able to connect with the fan base, which is something you see, you even feel it as a fan. I mean, it's hard to quantify it, but it's palpable in the locker room. It's palpable when they give, their press interviews before and after games. I mean, personally, how do you feel about it? Do you believe in he's the right guy to kind of help them, wake up the sleeping giant and get them back to, where they quote unquote should be?
Yeah, I think Eric Ten Hag is a very, very good manager. He has the kind of arrogance and the confidence and just the ultimate belief. He's also a taskmaster, which is something that I think United has always needed. He got rid of Ronaldo, dropped Harry Maguire, took the captaincy from him. He's never been afraid to make big decisions, which is something you've always needed to be a Manchester United manager. There's so much scrutiny on him, and he's always been able to handle it. He managed, I think, Bayern Munich's second team, their like reserve team, and was there when under Pep, and then has really been raised in kind of the Dutch school Ajax and FC Utrecht, I think. And so he's not your classic like Ajax or Pep Guardiola disciple where it's all about possession. He has a little bit more kind of tactical flexibility, I guess, to him. He created those Ajax teams that ended up going losing to Spurs at in the Champions League
Greatest game
semifinal.
ever played.
And Tottenham wanted him, I think, but said he wasn't charismatic enough and ended up going with Jose Mourinho, which
In hindsight.
terrible, terrible. Uh, but no, I think I definitely believe in him. He has brought in a ton of his players, which is a little bit concerning and I think that's more of a problem with United's overall director, not really having a good director of football, which I think is probably the biggest issue that's been plaguing them for the last 10 years. They don't have like a direction, kind of a single unified focus that the team can kind of pursue, which is something that you see Manchester City having. Liverpool before they kind of got rid of all their recent top brass that they had. But I think Eric Ten Hag has the kind of charisma and the personality to bring this club back to success. I think the one thing that I do worry about for every team that's not Manchester City is that I'm not sure there is a return to the top for any team that isn't Manchester City. I'm not sure Klopp will ever get back. I'm not sure Mikel Arteta would ever make it there. I'm not sure United or Pochettino at Chelsea. Like, Manchester City is just far, 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 far too good. I don't even know what success looks like for any of these teams, because if Pep Guardiola didn't exist, Liverpool would have multiple titles. Arsenal would have won the title last year. United may have won the title in the last 5 years. Even in some of their really down years, they may have actually won a title. They finished second three times, I think, in the last few years. So it's not like United finishes like seventh place. They're always generally they've missed the Champions League, I think, 2 or 3 times, and they generally finish, in the top four. But I'm not even sure what success looks like, because do I think Eric Ten Hag can turn United into 100-point title winners? No, I don't. But I don't think any team that isn't Manchester City can really do that anymore. So I do think he's the guy to, bring energy back to the club. But I think, and I'm trying to remember my mantra of, or never are as good as they seem. and things are never as bad as they seem. But when you look at Manchester City, I'm not sure how anybody comes close to them for as long as Pep is there, and he may be there for another decade.
I can't tell if that's a depressing reality or like a really good way to kind of temper your expectations, but very fair. And I have to ask the question from there then. So what would you consider a, successful season? What are you looking for United to do this year for, again, obviously to win things, but
So I think last year was really successful because if you look at United, it's a team that's always in crisis because if Tottenham loses 2 games, people can make fun of them, or if Chelsea loses 2 games or has the worst season ever last year, people just ended up kind of sweeping it under the rug a little bit, right? Like if United did what Chelsea did last year and finished 14th place or whatever they finished, the amount of just destruction of that would like implosion would just be insane. There is no scrutiny like the United scrutiny, and so I think it makes it hard to survive these things, which is also why I think Ten Hag is a great manager for United too, because when he showed up last year, they lost their first 2 games in part due to De Gea and some other things to Brighton and Brentford, and it was considered the biggest crisis. And he came back and beat Klopp's Liverpool, and then they ended up finishing in third place in the Premier League last year. So I think they finished in the Premier League third place. They won the League Cup. They lost the FA. They went to the FA Cup final last year. So they had probably, if you count just looking at silverware, depending on if you think how successful Arsenal's season was last year, they were the second most successful team in England last year.
yeah, definitely.
I think this year you'd always want to say title. I think that's already gone. When at the time we're recording this, they've lost 2 games,
Yeah, week four.
and City's undefeated. And this is the part. City is not good. This is the worst that City will be all season. They always just end up picking up pace in the second half. So they're not going to win the title. I think they have to finish top 4. And if they can make a deep Champions League run, United has missed a deep Champions League run for the last, 6 years or so. So if they can just do those 2 things, I think it's still a reasonably successful season. But they've spent a lot of money again this year, and everyone will be expecting the title. But it's just like I said with Man City, it's a little bit hard to. It's like if you had every team in the NBA, like Manchester City is just the Warriors with Kevin Durant. I mean, like they're like the Yankees with A-Rod and Roger Clemens, and they're just the best team. Like you can't like. And what does success look like in that era when every single team is competing for the title? So I don't know. In theory, you'd want them in a title race this year. I'm not sure how realistic that is.
Yeah, it's, let's think of Usain Bolt at his peak. Like, just imagine being a sprinter that's in there. It's like, okay, what's your realistic goal here? Oh, he, breaks his ankle coming out of the blocks. That's basically all you can hope for, I guess.
I know somebody's going to need to go, like, I don't know, buy Pep off or something. The Saudis are going to have to go pay Pep like $5 billion to like play Holland and keep in goal or something.
But kind of going off the same vein of there's a couple of other questions I want to ask you about, from your opinion as a well-informed fan of United, are there any like positions, the transfer window has literally just closed as we're recording this. Are there any spots that you kind of feel like one position that United could have shored up, or one place that you really wish they would have brought in a player for, just so you'd feel like a little bit more comfortable in how they're going to do this year?
I actually think this is quite a successful window. I think they just brought in a backup left back because Luke Shaw is injured for a while and Malacia's out for a little bit of time. They brought in Amrabat.
Is it a Luke Shaw contract here? I'm just trying to think if he's going to be good
This year. No, I don't think it is.
Okay.
I love Luke Shaw, man. He's been here since 2013 because he was bought when he was 18. But he does have some kind of ups and downs in his form. But I think when he's on, he's the best left back in the league. That just doesn't happen every year. They brought in Mason Mount and Amrabat to kind of shore up the midfield because Casemiro's, I think, getting a little older. He doesn't quite have the legs that he used to. And I think the most important signing, is Andre Onana to replace De Gea, which I think is a huge victory because he's this kind of ball-playing keeper that will allow them to revolutionize their style. They had De Gea, because back in the day, goalkeepers were not expected to play out from the back. But nowadays, they are really part of the outfield team. They're like used as the 11th defender or 11th player, and it really is critical to helping break the press in this modern day era where the press is so important. Having a really good outlet that can still play passes is huge and a necessary component for every top team. I think United and Spurs were both lacking that with Hugo Lloris and David De Gea, who, 30 years ago would still be two of the best goalkeepers in the world, but just don't have that kind of level to play out. And I think the biggest thing is United were successful last year without having a single center forward. So they played Wout Weghorst, who is just this guy who Burnley doesn't even want, that they got on for free from like Turkey, who scored 0 goals for them and basically just ran around up top, like pressing people, which is like fine, but like not what you expect from like a Manchester United player. And they didn't score that many goals and were still successful. I think that speaks to the spine of the team and how, well set up and how good they were at defending last year. So they spent huge amounts of money on this really young guy, Rasmus Højlund, this big Danish guy who kind of has a similar name to Erling Haaland, now plays in Manchester like Erling Haaland, is a tall, blonde, left-footed striker that's like 6'1", like Erling Haaland, but will never be Erling Haaland. But if he can kind of turn himself into Manchester United's next big center forward, which they've not had, they've been basically relying on old guys like Edison Cavani, Falcao, Ibrahimovic for the last decade, and so if he can kind of bloom, that will take United to the next level. So I think the transfer market's been overall quite successful. I think if you wanted to poke holes in it, it's not that they need to necessarily buy more players. It's just the fact that the players that they bought need to be better. Antony, I think, needs to show that he's better. Mason Mount needs to prove that he's worth the money that they're spending on him. Højlund needs to be successful. I think right and left back you could look at as areas for improvement, and I think Casemiro, we'll see if Amrabat is a good enough replacement for him, but I think the team as a whole is in good shape. They have a good keeper, good center backs, in theory a decent midfield, and if Antony can come good, Rashford and Antony are very good wingers, and then Bruno Fernandes is probably, if Bruno Fernandes played for Manchester City, he'd be thought of as Kevin De Bruyne, but he plays for Manchester United and kind of has a slappable face. I think he's the type of guy that all the other fans in the league just like absolutely hate him because he like whines a lot and dives a lot and stuff like that. But he is, I think, one of the absolute best players in the world. But when the team's not doing great or has big losses like they did last year when they lost 7-0 to Liverpool, I think they lost 6-1 to City. United ends up with all this, people just look at everything at United and say that it's bad. But Bruno Fernandes is one of the best players in the world, and if Højlund can come good, then I think this team has a lot of potential. But so, there's always players that you could buy. A lot of people will say like they should have bought Harry Kane this year, but I'm not sure that would have been enough to win them the title anyway, and that would have mortgaged the future.
Yeah, I mean, you could make a case for literally every team in the world probably to have bought Harry Kane, minus maybe City. So,
and Levy would never have sold him to him.
Get him out of the league, get him over there. I saw some weird video of him in a lederhosen, and he's such an awkward guy.
It seems pretty funny. I mean, the guy is about as interesting as dry paint, but he's damn good at footy. So
yeah, I mean, dude, watch his hot ones. His hot ones, man. He just, I'm sure he did a lot of takes. He's probably had a lot of press coaching, but man, he just still comes off as just like milk toast is what people call him, but he's just like a glass of milk. He's just this plain, not a lot of flavor, just chalky.
There's no way he's a good captain for England. I don't really understand that, but anyway.
I think he's yeah, we want to go deep into the psyche of Harry Kane, and I think it's a good walkthrough though of United's kind of starting 11. I think you glossed and touched on most of the big positions that are out there, and I have to ask the question that most pundits have kind of been going over in the transfer window and in the offseason is the Mason Mount transfer, right? It was a really weird year for England center midfielders, with Declan Rice moving, James Maddison, Mason Mount. And so a lot of them got a lot of attention just because of how big the transfers were. And of course, whenever you're getting transfers with English national team players, it's always a bigger story. And then of course, when you're going from Chelsea to United, those are two of the biggest clubs. So it's going to get a lot of talking. I guess, how do you think he's going to kind of end up integrating into that midfield? Because like you said, it's already a strong midfield. I mean, Bruno is an incredible 10, Casemiro, and Christian Eriksen. Christian Eriksen fills that kind of like deep lying playmaker that can kind of be that double eight position. So, I mean, do you think Mason Mount is there for like kind of like dependability and to kind of just be an extra option in case of injuries, or like how do you really see him integrating into the system?
Yeah, I think Mason Mount, he's a ch childhood Chelsea fan, and has come up through their club, been there for decades. And so to gain him and for him to leave Chelsea, I think shows that there's a lot of the relationship had gone very sour there. United paid a good bit of money for him, and they're paying him a healthy wage. They gave him the number 7 shirt. The first 2 games has not worked. He's injured out right now. I think the idea for Mason Mount is that he's an upgrade for Christian Eriksen, which I think on paper he absolutely is. He has an incredible work rate. He does coaches love him because he does exactly what the coaches ask of him. He has the defending. He's not like a great defensive midfielder, but he puts in the work, and he also has the attacking output. I think since he's been at Chelsea, he's actually scored the most goals or had the most goals plus assists of any player, including all the attacking players at Chelsea. So he also has the output, can hit a set piece. So in theory, he fits quite well there. I think the idea was to turn United into kind of what City have, which is having Rodri at the base in the midfield at that kind of number 6, and then turn Bruno and Mount into kind of more attacking 8s, or both even kind of like 10s where they both get forward and just kind of have Casemiro shield the back line. But I think Casemiro has actually aged faster than was expected. He's 31 or 32 now, and he looks slow to start the year. So I'm not sure he's going to ever have the mobility anymore to survive like Rodri. So I think that did not work in the first few games. So part of that is I think Casemiro, although he was incredible last year and still a very good player, I'm not sure he's good enough to just kind of run the midfield and defensive midfield by himself anymore. He definitely used to be able to do that. But so I think the theory behind Mason Mount is very good. We'll see if he can kind of adapt and work with playing with Bruno Fernandes without having the midfield get overrun. We'll see. But I think Mason Mount is somebody that Eric Ten Hag absolutely wanted. He's a player that Liverpool wanted, player I think that Arsenal probably would have wanted. And so I think he's hopefully going to come good. I think him and Kai Havertz are kind of being asked by Arteta and Ten Hag to do similar things, kind of be that attacking 8, but also have the work rate. So I think both managers are trying to integrate their teams where they have this defensive 6, Arsenal with Declan Rice and United with Casemiro, and then have more 2 attacking 8s. I think both teams are showing that that's actually not very easy to integrate into the system. So we'll see if he can figure it out.
He's so young and coachable. I mean, I think there's always a lot of knee-jerk reactions, and people are instantly trying to put to say, "Oh man, this guy's a flop," and it wasn't worth the money. So yeah, I mean, 4 games into a season, learning a new system, you can't make any decisions or really know what's going to end up happening because you never know. Even guys who have terrible first seasons, I mean, they end up becoming incredible players in the future. So
He's literally played 2 games for
yeah,
United.
yeah, exactly. He's a 24-year-old who's on a new team, right? And you're going to be like, okay, you can't make like a call. But if you go listen to pundits, they all need to get paid, and so sound bites, sell newspapers or articles or TV shows. So I get it, but just make sure you take all of that with a heavy dose of salt. Let's put it that way.
But I'd also say when you're watching the biggest problem with I think all of soccer commentary is that it's so hard to analyze this game. There's so few advanced stats that really work. People are looking for them and stuff, but it's so hard to analyze the game. It's really hard to like objectively say this player had a good game. Whereas you can do that much easier in basketball, baseball, football. Football maybe a little less, but you have things like PFF where there's set plays and people are grading every play and stuff. So there's at least a little bit of like quantifiability to the metrics. Soccer is absolutely not like that. It's very difficult to tell why a team didn't play well. It's very difficult to tell if a player played well. And what that means is that people are dumb, and it leads to really reductive takes. So a team is good. Everyone just says every player on that team is good. It happened with Manchester United when they were winning every game. Players like Tom Cleverley and stuff would go play for England because he plays in the midfield for United. He must be good. because they're winning all these things, and so he must be good enough to play for England. The same is true of Manchester City now. And part of the reason why people are just buying all of their academy players for 20 million is because he was taught to be a Manchester City player, and the only reason he's not making the Manchester City team is because their team is the best. So let's spend 25 million on this guy. Whereas United, because and it's not like they lose every game. I mean, they're finishing top four. Like the way that people talk about United, you'd think that they'd like finishing 10th every year. But when you have a team that's has all this drama, all this negativity, because when they lose games, it just means that everyone looks at every single one of their players and says they're bad. Happened to Rashford when he was terrible. He had a really bad season. Happens to Bruno. Happens to every single player and then there's no way to argue that. Somebody says, oh, this player is terrible. Look at how United lost. And then you say, well, I don't think it's his fault. And they're like, well, their team sucks. Like, and he's a big part of their team. Like, how could he not be bad? And so it leads to this extremely reductive thinking. And so, yeah, I think all of soccer analysis very much lags behind other sports, but and it's all just based on who wins this really high variance game.
Yeah, that's a really, really, really good point. And I think as you watch or follow a team, you start to realize sometimes you've watched or you know more about a team than the commentators or the analysts because they'll say something and you're just gonna be like, if you watch more than 10 games of this guy, that's just like not true. That is, yeah, there's echoing from each other. What the big thing was that last year when United signed Martinez as their center back, it was like the first like month, everyone was like, well, he's only 5 foot, he's 5'9". He's too short to be a center back. And there's this like echo chamber of, he's never going to be able to cut it in this physical Premier League because he's so short. And then, the dude ends up becoming a great center back, wins a World Cup, and no one ever mentions that again. Yeah, it's just funny how much of a echo
But part of the reason why people are okay with him because now you can basically say, well, he won a World Cup.
Yeah, yeah.
And so now it's like, but like that's so stupid. Like that's a big reason why. And you can't insult Rafael Varane because he's won a World Cup, and it's hard to insult Casemiro because he's won 5 Champions Leagues. But the rest of the players that haven't won stuff, it's very easy to attack them. And this is not a Manchester United only problem. I think Arsenal and Tottenham have both suffered from this for a long time because neither team has won anything in the last decade really. So I think their players have always been kind of talked down on. They've always said, oh, this guy doesn't have the mentality. This guy's not tough. This guy's not a leader. This guy, is weak. Those are all things that people say about all these teams that don't win. And I think especially in this era, like I was saying, with Manchester City on top, with every team that isn't Manchester City losing in some way every year, it just grinds my gears, so to say.
Grinds my gears. It's so funny too because it's a game of just so many, one small play changes the fate, right? Like, let's say Mbappe scores the goal in the last second of the World Cup final. Like, now all these guys aren't World Cup winners, right? Are they now no longer these mentally tough guys that are known winners? Like, yeah, it's just like one play and nothing's changed about who this guy is or how he plays. It's just like one kick that he was not involved in, and it changes the entire narrative. So I think that's a really good point. And yeah, I always hate that when people are like, oh, well, he's a great goalie. He's, England's number one, or he's France's number one. And by number one, I mean their goalie. And it's like, well, he has to be good then. It's like, I mean, he can be good or he can't, but
yeah, it can be just by default.
yeah, exactly. Just because you're picked for your national team doesn't make you, this automatic great player. But we are running out of time, so I kind of want to give you a chance to talk about anything else or any conversations you kind of want to have about United that you kind of want to bring up, or things that you think a prospective fan should definitely know about, or important things that they should kind of consider when they're trying to pick their club.
Well, let's do the hope to heartbreak. I think, the hope to heartbreak scale for United, I think, is always a 5 because they spend so much money. The transfer window is the best part of United season, although they have huge drama there too. And they're terrible in the transfer market, so it's not actually that good. But they have the most, because they're like the most like talked about club. There's always like a million rumors and infinite amounts and they're kind of like incompetent in some ways. There's always a million rumors about them and stuff.
What do you always say about the Jags? The best day of the Jags season is draft day.
Hey, they're going to be good this year.
I think that's hilarious.
But yeah, that is the best day usually. April is when the Jag season starts. But anyway, United United always, I think, has hope because they always are willing to, or at least have the money to go spend and buy a ton of new players. So they're always going to have access to the top tier talent because of the money that they pay, because of the name brand of the club. So I think 5 out of 5, the in terms of your hope, um, the ability to restart fresh, buy new guys, buy the best players in the world, they are way up there. In terms of heartbreak, I'd really have to say it's like a 4 out of 5 because the expectations are so high that because they spend basically the most money alongside Manchester City in the league, the expectation for them is to win league titles every year or Champions Leagues, and that has not happened. It's not really been that close in the last decade, in part because of Liverpool and Manchester City. But that's also what makes it heartbreaking is that the teams that are above them is going to be Manchester City, and that is one of their biggest rivals. And Liverpool is also a good team, their biggest rival. So right now they are in an era that is not great. So for me, hope 5, heartbreak 4.
I think there's good rationale for both of those. And I mean, I'm going to say the hope for me is going to be a 4 is what I'm going to give them. And I think just to echo kind of what you were saying is it's a fan base that is always expecting to win things no matter what. And I think it's a really, really good point you made that last year they had them. I mean, obviously you see Arsenal in second place and there's the big, drama of who's going to win the title. But you're right. United had the second most, the second best season if you count, silverware and kind of how going to finals. Like it's a great year for them outside of winning it. So I think having such a proud fan base with that rich history, you're always going to have a high level of hope. And now that you always have these marquee players, these famous players on the team, it's always going to stay high. So I'm going to keep that hope at 4. And I'm also going to give the heartbreak a 4. I think you said it perfectly. That's exactly what I was going to say. Heartbreak is tough when you don't win, but it's even tougher when it's your two biggest rivals that are the ones that are winning the title. So that's just makes it so much harder for a fan base if they don't end up winning. But I think maybe turning a corner here to kind of restart the next cycle, you could say. And just maybe Pep is going to be bored now that he's won the treble and says, you know what, let me go do something else or let me find a new project.
I'm worried in 13 years, Man City has 20 titles. I think they have like 7 right now.
I don't sleep. I don't sleep anymore.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think this is a great club, right? Manchester United is an incredible team to follow. It's always interesting. It's always drama filled. They have that history. Their fans are incredible too. They have some of the best fans in the country. Their away fans are reliably some of the best in the country in terms of making noise when you go to away stadiums. Old Trafford is an incredible place. It is a team that is huge, is commercial, is popular from a marketing standpoint, spends a lot of money, but also does have, I think, a good heart to it, a good kind of atmosphere about it, a expectation, a swagger, a kind of personality that I think comes with being who they have been for the last 50 years or longer. It makes it a really good team to follow. There's never a lack of podcasts, never a lack of articles, never a lack of rumors, never a lack of drama with Manchester United. And now is a good time to get in with United because you can say that you started what for them, and other people that follow the smaller teams will laugh when I say Manchester United starting at the bottom because they just spent like 200 million this offseason. But for United, this is the last decade has been close to the bottom. So there's never been a better time to buy Manchester United stock. So I recommend that you do so.
Relative bottom. And hey, you never know what the bottom is, right? Anything can happen.
That's true. That's true.
But all right, I think that is kind of all the time we have to talk about United. So thank you so much for listening to this episode on why you should or should not support Manchester United. Again, we're going to keep kind of rolling out some of these episodes talking about different clubs in the Premier League and give you kind of the case and our opinions on why you should or shouldn't follow them. So please stick with us for that. Make sure you follow us on any kind of social media that we have out there, which is mostly going to be on Instagram. I think we have a TikTok or two out there, which has been an interesting endeavor. But also the biggest thing you can do for us is leave a review or just tell somebody about the pod. which we absolutely appreciate. And so we can continue kind of getting some of our opinions and give you some knowledge out there. So thank you so much for hanging out with us, and we'll definitely talk to you next time.
Signing off.